Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today in Vlachim in the Czech Republic, visiting Sellier Bellot, one of the largest ammunition companies in Europe and in fact in the world. And we're taking a look at some of the cool guns that they have in their reference armory. Specifically today, we have the CIS, the Chartered Industries of Singapore SR-88A. Long intro to get to here. So CIS forms in 1967 in Singapore. Singapore wants to have some domestic small arms production, and specifically they license the M16. And with technical assistance from Colt, they manufacture the M16 from about 1970 until 1980. And they make a couple 100,000 of them for the Singaporean armed forces, as well as selling them to some other countries in the area, most notably Thailand. Now, they're going to continue to evolve and develop their small arms production. And in 1980, they released the SR-80, the Singapore Assault Rifle 80. This is actually a design created by one Frank Waters for the Sterling Company in England. Gets licensed to CIS, and CIS will produce that gun for about 10 years. In 1988, they release a newer model of rifle, the SR-88, from 1988. That will go into production in 88 and remain in production until 1995. Now, what we have here is the SR-88A. When the SR-88 was first developed, it was like the SR-80. It used a stamped upper receiver and a stamped lower receiver. This is a gun that's the SR-80, very similar in concept to the AR-18, and the original SR-88 used that same setup. In 1990, they made some improvements to the system, and that created the SR-88A, which is what we have here. And the most substantial of those changes was replacing the stamped lower with a milled lower. So what we ultimately have here is a gun conceptually kind of like the FN-FNC, with a milled AR-style lower receiver, but a stamped, almost SIG 550-ish upper receiver. It uses a long-stroke gas piston system, adjustable gas regulator, AR pattern magazines. It is sort of an evolved version of the AR-18. So a pretty cool rifle. Now, before we go farther, I do want to point out that what we have here is sort of an oddball version. So CIS, which by the way is now ST Kinetics, the company name, they made two versions of this. They made an 11.5-inch carbine, which we have here with this cool collapsing stock, and they made an 18.1-inch rifle version. Now, what we have here is the 18.1-inch rifle, but it has the carbine gas system on it. So most of the pictures you see of this will have the gas block out here with a grenade launching setup of for a muzzle device. This is mechanically the same gun, but a little bit different barrel setup, and I'm not entirely sure why. Anyway, let's dig in and let's take this apart. Let me show you some of the cool features in it. First off, let me point out that these rifles use standard AR pattern mags. Of course, CIS had been making M16s back in the day. This is a generic magazine that I took out of S&B's armory. These were originally shipped with a polymer mag that looked kind of like a Steyr AUG magazine. I didn't have any of those, so I used this one, but any standard AR mag will work in these. On the upper receiver, we have the manufacturing mark from Chartered Industries of Singapore, CIS. And then on the side of the magazine well, we have a nice big designation, SR-88A caliber, and a serial number. And I want to point out here, these are both pretty early guns. The pictures that you will see on the internet, in addition to having that slightly different gas system configuration, also have a few other different features, like a different rear sight. I'm pretty sure what we have here are two very early production examples. So this is number 900, the serial number range being 600,000. And the carbine is an even earlier example, number 433. And then lastly, we have selector markings, safe, semi, and automatic. These were offered optionally with a 3-round burst. Our two examples here don't have the burst mechanism. A few of the elements on the exterior, we have a brass deflector here and a polymer dust cover that will automatically open when the bolt goes forward or back. You can see there's a little protrusion here that sits in this hollow in the bolt carrier. So it'll snap closed when the bolt's closed. As soon as you open the bolt, that pops open. Speaking of opening the bolt, we have a non-reciprocating folding charging handle up here on the top. I'll show you how that works internally in a moment. We have an optics mounting rail. This is exactly the same rail that is on the Ultimax machine gun. It's a proprietary Chartered Industries style of rail. The front sight is a round pin adjustable for elevation, and the rear sight here is very much an M16A1 style. You have a flip peep, one slightly larger opening than the other, adjustable for windage on the side. Again, the photos that you see online will often show a different rear sight style that has a single aperture and basically a BDC cam that allows you to set it to 1, 3, or 500 meters. When exactly that change took place, I'm not sure. There is a spring-loaded detent in the front of the trigger guard that allows it to be folded down, so you can use this with gloves if you need to. Sort of an M16-ish style grip. Hollow on the inside, there isn't any storage there. And then a very distinctive cutout style of butt stock. Not sure if there's any particular reason for this other than being able to put a sling swivel right in the middle that can be used ambidextrously, but definitely makes it easy to spot these in photos. And of course, the most distinctive element of the carbine is its cool rotating collapsing stock. So I've got a button on the top here that allows me to pull this out. This looks very much like the FN Mini-Me Para stock. Once you have it all the way out, there is a spring in here. So you open it up, and you can then drop it into place in the rear trunnion, and that's your collapsing stock. And we also have a folding carry handle here. It's got a little latch on it, so it locks in the downward position. Push the latch, you can snap it into the upward position right there. The gas regulator here has 3 positions. It is currently set to number 1. I can pull that forward, rotate it over to 0, which is cut off. On the rifle versions, you did have grenade launching capability, so a gas cutoff there is useful for grenades. And then I can rotate it again through to number 2 and have a larger gas port. Disassembly is super easy, so first off, we're going to pop this pin through. That allows me to pivot the lower down. Now on this example, let me warn you here, spoiler, there are going to be a bunch of broken parts in here that you'll see. On this example, the recoil springs come out, and then I can pop out the bolt and carrier. So we're normally used to seeing AR-18 bolts on short stroke systems where there's just a flat face at the front of the bolt carrier. This has the gas piston pinned in place and attached. So when you fire, this whole thing is going to move backwards. I can then continue disassembly by pushing through this firing pin retainer. It's going to come out the side. It is captive. That's nice. That lets me drop out the firing pin, which on this one is broken. For what it's worth, I figured before I started the video, I took this apart and figured I'll just swap the pin from the carbine so that we have an intact one. The firing pin in the carbine is actually broken into 3 pieces instead of 2 pieces. Once I've got that out, I can pull the cam pin and then the bolt comes out. So again, like an AR-18, no gas rings as you would have on an AR-15. And that is basically field stripped there. I can then push the front receiver pin through. That lets me remove the lower. It's pretty much an AR fire control system inside. Again, not a whole lot going on there. This little guy right here is our auto trip. So if I put this into automatic, when the hammer cocks, pulling the trigger will not actually release it until this is pushed forward by the bolt. That releases the hammer forward, and then pulling the trigger allows the hammer to drop. So in full auto mode, as with basically all properly designed machine guns, holding the trigger doesn't continually release the hammer. It's when the bolt goes forward, trips this, that means that the bolt is fully in battery, and it is then safe to release the hammer to go forward and fire. Have our spring-loaded ejector right there. Magazine hold open, magazine release. This has no ambidextrous controls. You've got your selector lever over here on the left. You've got your magazine release on the right. that's about it. Now the charging handle here has this square plate on the inside, which is just going to catch on the top corner of the bolt carrier to pull it back. Now the charging handle slides on these rails on the outside. On the inside, it has this little square plate that holds it in place. Normally that's held in by a pin. On this one, the pin's missing, so I can easily drop that off, pull the charging handle out. That's the hole for its pin. This normally lives right there. You can see when I pull the charging handle up, it extends that hook, and that's what's actually going to grab on the front of the bolt carrier to pull it back. So this does not function as a forward assist, it just pulls the bolt back. Now we're also going to pull off the handguards, which are kind of one of the clunkier parts of this gun to my mind. There's a lot of stuff going on inside here. So first off, the retention method is kind of cool. We have this hook that comes around and retains everything and is then held in place by a screw. I can remove that screw, which allows this to rotate out of the way. There's a little notch in the barrel there that it sits in. Once that's out of the way, everything just comes loose here. So this comes up. The handguard retaining plate comes forward. I can then lift. There we go. I can lift off the two handguard sides. We then have the gas tube in here. We have the front handguard retainer plate. We have the rear handguard retainer plate back here, and then we have the carry handle. In order to adjust the gas piston, you pull it forward and rotate. In order to disassemble it, I have to push this release button down, and then, oh, and this one's, all right, this one's completely jammed in place. It's frozen in there, so I'm not going to take that one out. Normally you rotate it just slightly farther. You can actually see the cutout right there. When that's vertical, it allows the gas plug to come out, and then the gas piston can come out, and then all of these flat plate parts just kind of fall off the gun. You can see there is an AR-15 sort of styled barrel nut here. You would remove this barrel nut, and then the barrel itself comes out. The bolt is actually supported by the two dual guide rods here, which run through the bolt like that. They are going to connect into a pair of holes up here at the front, and then this rear plate sort of locks them in place in the back. So the bolt is actually not wearing, in theory, on the stamped upper receiver. It's riding, floating essentially on these two guide rails. Again, like the AR-18. Inside the upper receiver, we have one rail welded to the left-hand side. That one rail is going to control movement of the cam pin, or it's going to lock the cam pin in place so that when the bolt is in the traveling position here, that cam pin is held in this downward position. It can't rotate up and let the bolt get out of position. Now, we're taking apart the rifle length one because there are some other broken pieces here, but I do want to show you the bolt carrier assembly out of the carbine here, because it has an element that's kind of cool that's broken on the rifle. So if we look up close here, well, first off, this whole assembly with the recoil springs is self-contained, and the way that's done is with this rotating plate. So in theory, when that's in that position, the pin here is a bit oversized, but in theory, with this in the horizontal position, the bolt carrier can come off, and if you lock it like that, it locks the recoil springs in place on the bolt carrier so that the whole thing comes out as a self-contained assembly. That's kind of cool too. And there you go, there's the Chartered Industries Singaporean SR-88A field stripped. There's a little bit of production overlap here. The original SR-88s are introduced, of course, in 1998 and produced until 1995. The improved SR-88A comes onto the scene in 1990, and it's produced until 2000. It was not made in huge numbers. There are two main military forces that did purchase them, those being Singapore, perhaps not surprisingly, and also Slovenia. Now, if you're wondering why Slovenia, it is almost certainly because Slovenia had an existing relationship with CIS. When Slovenia first got its independence from Yugoslavia, one of the rifles that they were able to purchase, or one of the sets of small arms they were able to purchase, were CIS-made SR-80 rifles and Ultimax machine guns. Pretty cool equipment for a small, newly independent Balkan country. At any rate, that relationship almost certainly carried over to purchases of the SR-88As.